Hi everyone, it's Miss Lexi. Today we're going to be talking about some examples from chapters 10, just to kind of help you review how to read in our bar graphs and different graphs that you might see throughout chapter 10 as you're working at home. So if we look at the first one, it says use the bar graph. Describe how the amount of practice time changed from week 1 to week 4. So we have the drum practice. They have week 1, 2, 3, and 4 at the bottom. It's labeled by week. And up the left-hand side, it says hours. So we have either 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and they go up to 5 hours. So it says describe how the amount of practice time changed from week 1 to week 4. And we see in week 1, there was only 1 hour. In week 2, there was 2 hours. In week 3, there are 3 hours. In week 4, they practiced for 4 hours. So a way that we could say is the amount of practice time did what? How did it change from week 1 to week 4? Well, it increased. An increase means that it went up, and we're going to be a little bit more specific that it increased by 1 hour each week. Okay, so that's a way that we can describe how the time changed based on this bar graph. Okay, so let's look at the next one. It says use the bar graph. How many more children chose summer than spring? So when we look at our bar graph, we have the seasons listed on the left, and we have the number of children at the bottom. That's the number of children who voted for each season as being their favorite season. And we can tell that because the title of this bar graph is favorite season. So when we look at this, we want to compare the number of children who chose summer compared to spring. Okay, so that's just one question we can answer based on this bar graph. So if I look at my summer, I see that summer ends right here. So if I look down from that line, it says 5. And if I look at spring at the very bottom, it goes to here, which goes to 3. Okay? So when we're comparing summer to spring, we're comparing the numbers 5 and 3. So when we compare 5 and 3, we can just do 5 minus 3 to get 2. Or if we're looking at our bar graph, we can see that there's 2 blocks that summer is further than spring. So that also can be how we can compare them. We can count them using the bar graph itself. But either way, we said that there were 2 more children that chose summer than spring. Okay? So now, let's go to the next example. It says, use the bar graph. How many shells do the children have in all? So in all is really important in that question. And in all means our total. We want to know how many were their total. So we want to know how many shells did the children have in all. And we see that at the bottom it says children. So we had Ella, John, Lily, and David who all collected shells. And up the left-hand side, it says the number of shells, which range from 0 to maybe up to 6. In this case, it says that Ella collected 2 shells. John went all the way up. He collected 5 shells. Lily collected 3 because that's where the top of her bar is. And David collected 4. So if we want to know how many shells do the children have in all, we want to add all of those numbers together. So we have 2 plus 5 plus 3 plus 4. And if I'm going to compare those, I'm going to add the first 2 and then the second 2 and then add those together just to make it a little bit easier. But we could just keep adding as we go down. So I'm going to say 2 plus 5 is 7 and 3 plus 4 is 7. So when I add 7 plus 7, I get a total of 14. So they collected or had 14 shows in all. All right, let's look at the next one. Use the picture graph. How many more rainy days were there in April than in May? So when we look at this picture graph, the title says the number of rainy days. And there's a key at the bottom. This key is really important for a picture graph. It tells us that every umbrella, so every one umbrella, stands for one day. So when we're seeing all the little umbrellas in our picture graph, each one represents one day. Sometimes they represent more than just one, so we have to be really careful that we check what the key is telling us. So each umbrella stands for one day. That's important. So if we're going to compare the number of rainy days in April to the number of rainy days in May, we need to count up how many were in April and how many were in May. So if I look at April, there was 1, 2, 3, 4 umbrellas for April. So there were 4 rainy days in April. If I look at May, there was only 1, 2. So there were 2 rainy days in May. And just for good practice, let's count up how many were in March. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There were 5 in March. That information is not important for this question, but if you were asked several questions, you might need that information. So it's always good to count up all of your data so that you can easily work with the numbers that you have instead of having to keep recounting all of your pictures. So if we're comparing April to May, we have 4 and we have 2. So we want to know how many more rainy days were in April than in May. Well, if we want to know how many more, we would do 4 minus 2 because more, if we want to know how many more, we're looking for the difference, and difference is when we subtract. So 4 minus 2 is 2. So there were 2 more rainy days. All right, we could be asked other questions, but that's just the only one they're asking right now, just for practice. Let's look at the next one. It says use the picture graph. Who has the most fish? So if we're looking at this, it says that each, and our key, it says each fish, each little picture of a fish stands for one fish. So if we're looking at these fish, we can quickly see who has the most. That's the nice thing about a picture graph and a bar graph. You can quickly see who has the least and who has the most. So if we want to know who has the most, we look for who has the most fish after their name, or who goes the farthest. So we see that the farthest row of fish go to this line, and that is for Gina. She had 4 fish. So we would say who has the most fish? Gina. And if we wanted to count up the other ones, we could quickly see that Jane had 1, Will had 3, and Evan had 2. Okay? But we can see who had the most by just looking at the pictures of the fish. And we can also see who had the least. We can see that Jane had the least because she had the least amount of fish. All right. Now let's look at our last example. So it says use the tally chart. Which color does the fewest children choose? Okay. So one thing about a tally chart is we see that the whole chart is about the favorite color. That's our title at the very top. But there are 2 categories. There's color and there's tally. So color is telling us what color we're talking about, and tally is telling you how many for each color. So we're going to say that that's how many children chose that color as their favorite color. When we count tally marks, every line represents 1. So if for an example, the bottom here, if I just put 1 tally, that means 1. If I put 2, that's 2. I put 3, that's 3. If I put 4, that's 4. When we get to 5, we do something different. We slash to the side so that we group them in groups of 5. That way we don't have a bunch of little dashes that we have to count all of them. We can quickly count by 5s and then count any extra. Okay? So when we look at these tally marks for blue, we have 1, 2, 3. So we knew that 3 children selected blue as their favorite color. For green, there's a group of 5, and there's 1, 2, 3, 4 more. So if I have a group of 5 and I add 4 more, I get 9. Same thing for red. If I have a group of 5, because I know when I have a slash, that's a group of 5, and I add 2 more, I get 7. And for yellow, I have a group of 5 and 1 more, which is 6. So that says use the tally chart. Which color did the fewest children choose? So we want to know which is the smallest. We can also see that if we look at our tally marks, they're lined up, and the only color who doesn't have at least 5 is blue. So that would be the fewest children chose blue as their favorite color. And we can also see that we had the numbers 3, 9, 7, and 6. And when we compare those, 3 is the smallest. So that's the fewest number of votes for blue. All right, so that's how we count our tallies. So make sure that when we're counting our tally marks, each line represents 1, but once we get to 5, we do our slash to make it a group. Okay? All right, hope this helps when you're working at home, and check out some of my other videos as well. See you guys.